For our panel, where we're going to talk about partnership between OTTs and telco. So I'm calling here to the stage Gunnar Selig. Gunnar is SVP and Head of Commercial Development for Telenor Digital Services, and is being joined as well by Paul Jackson, who is Principal Analyst at Informa Telecoms and Media, and is from the UK.
Hey, Gunnar.
While our panelists take their seats. So it's about delivering innovative services to customers. We all have seen OTT services grow tremendously over the last couple of years. We have seen also that network operators have tried, well, with various success, different strategies to either counter OTTs or join and partner with OTTs or to start their own services. And today, basically, we have still an ecosystem that is highly fragmented with OTT players that are coming from the internet selling services or giving services to wireless users. And network operators that are still by and large, sitting on the fence with respect to how to address that emerging OTT services. So maybe we'll start with Gunnar from Telenor to have his perspective on how operators can address OTT as a strategy. Is it a matter of competition, co-opetition, collaboration?
It's a lot. It's a lot like what was said from Spotify here in the latter presentation. Telenor is one of the 10 largest telcos with about 150 million customers, 130 million of them in Asia. And we work very well with OTT players, especially in Asia. And it's not one formula that works for each country, because, for instance, Asia is large prepaid markets. Little use of data traffic. It's mostly calling, actually, voice. So when we work with OTT players in Asia, we work with, probably heard about it, Facebook, or Line, or WhatsApp, or KakaoTalk, and those kinds of services. And our target is then to get people from feature phones and over to smartphone and start to use data traffic. That's our interest in those markets. While in Scandinavia or Europe, our interest is a little bit different when we work with the OTT players. We work with music streaming services. We work with several different smaller services within security, etc., gaming, etc. also. And then the point is more like Michael addressed there, is actually to do a market differentiation, attract customer. It has some retention effect also. Hard to isolate the exactly effect of one service, but it do have some effect. But what we see in the future is that we would like to utilize those partnerships even better. So what we try to do, at least, and I know other operators are trying to do the same thing, is to make it easier for OTT players to connect to our network. Today, if we were going to do an operation with Spotify would have to integrate with all 13 business units of Telenor, one at a time. So what we're trying to do is to make one connection point, so you can address all of them just with one integration. That's some things we try to change.
Michael, when you have those bundles with telcos, if the service is sponsored by the network operator and the user doesn't actually pay for the service, or it's part of his bundle, do they pay for the traffic, for the bytes, the streaming itself?
That's a great question. Sometimes they do, but a lot of our deals, Spotify is 0 rated.
Okay.
So there isn't any penalty for the consumer.
Okay. So in that case, so the operator will have a relationship with Spotify and actually sponsor the usage as well as the traffic that is being used. Oh, I see. Maybe a question for Paul. You have interactions with a lot of network operators as well as OTT players. What do you see the current model is? Is there a current model in terms of interaction between OTTs and telco, or is still very fragmented and diverging?
It's a million different stories from a million different conversations, but it is becoming more pragmatic. I think we've seen, whether it's in mobile or fixed line telcos, this idea that, wow, some firm elsewhere can do this, but we can do this because we've got all these customers. That's been tried and failed in multiple markets, with music, with video, with all sorts of services, with gaming. And I think now increasingly a lot of telcos are being more pragmatic. They are looking at, say, the Spotify model, or partnering with OTT providers, maybe for a revenue share, maybe to reduce churn. And we're seeing many more of those conversations taking place than even a year ago.
So is there a realization from network operators that they haven't been great at selling services that they've created themselves, and that, well, there are other more successful way to deliver those services?
I think it's a realization, having seen the balance sheets of some of these services they've launched, staffed up, hired floors of lawyers to negotiate rights, for instance, in the music or video space, and then subsequently made no revenue whatsoever, and had to go back to their shareholders and say, yeah, that just didn't work. I know a year ago we were saying we spent all this money on football rights, for instance, and this was going to transform the game. It hasn't.
I think I've seen Vodafone Group announce a new platform to basically deliver open APIs for OTTs to make it simpler, to have more control over the user experience. So network operators are going to, in many cases, become enablers of those OTT services. Gunnar, could that backfire?
It could. It could definitely backfire, because I would have to comment on the other thing here first also. Go ahead. Because unfortunately, you are right. I don't know. Who of you has seen an operator OTT service that takes off in the market? Raise a hand. Raise your hand. No one. Actually,
where do you have seen an operator-owned service without talking about OTT, just being immensely successful?
And it's a reason for that. It's several reasons for that. It's internet services. First of all, operators talk about OTT service. I used to work in an internet company before I started in Telenor, and when I came to Telenor, they talked about OTT service. I remember, what the hell is OTT? It's over the top. Oh yeah, does that mean that the service is on the way down? No, it means that it goes on the internet. Never heard the expression. I'm not sure if you use that expression when you talk about yourself in Spotify, that you are an OTT company, but I guess you're
maybe a value-added service, but not OTT.
No, you talk about internet service. So we have this kind of language issue. That's one thing. And we in operators, we have a culture for building a base station and market SIM cards. That's our nature. That's what we have done. We don't have a culture for trialing and erroring stuff due to user feedbacks and like working after an ABCD model. We don't have that culture, or we haven't had that culture. That's something that we're of course trying to change, and that's one of the reasons I think that operators have struggled a bit with within the services segment. Another thing that internet companies tend to think, or OTT companies tend to think, that operators have great distribution. Well, that's a fact with some modification at least, because as was mentioned in the Spotify presentation also, what operators do is that we buy a lot of above-the-line marketing. We spend a lot of money on that. But we don't have very much attention or face time on our services to the users. So we don't have strong distribution, actually, ourselves. But we can buy TV space, we can buy boards, we can buy newspapers, ad space, we can do that. But
a follow-up question, and sorry to interrupt you, because there's this widely believed assumption that network operators know their customers, that they have all this data. They know where they are, they know where they're going, they know how much time they spend where, they have this billing relationship where they can, draw and patterns in terms of usage and who they're calling and what. And there is this myth maybe that network operators would be able to monetize that, well, relationship, or at least those patterns, and provide value added to internet services by providing more context in the future. Is that something that you see has value, that operators are going to be able to enable? I mean,
Yes.
are network operators going to be able to add value to the internet services, or is it just a tube? Is it just transport?
No, we have a lot of information, you're right. If we have been good enough of utilizing that information up till now, that could be discussed. But we have an extremely amount of information. If we if we structure it, that would be very, very valuable.
Michael, when you do those deals and those bundles with those network operators, do you derive value beyond just the reach and beyond the relationship? Do you actually get data that allows you to, I don't know, individualize the user experience because you get, well, more relevant context from those relationships?
With partners, we'll see how we can get more data from the partners, because we don't see how, well, we can actually see most of it if we want, but we don't see how people navigate within a service, for instance.
I understand, Gunnar, but, well, Michael has a different perspective because he's dealing with a lot of different network operators, and I was wondering whether there was any example of having context from the network operators or from the network in order to enrich the experience in Spotify.
Typically, the way the data has been more of a one-way street from Spotify to the carrier.
Would you value if it were a two-way street?
Sure, absolutely. But we also understand that carriers aren't going to, even with things like, we're constantly struggling to quantify the results of these partnerships. So a carrier might say, wow, it's really helped churn, or it's really helped customer acquisition, but putting a number on that is a different story.
Indeed.
And that's with our closest partners.
Well,
so
I think, for the whole panel, the challenge, I was in a previous discussion yesterday, I think, in one other panel, and my opinion is that while network operators are not geared from an organizational standpoint to deal with those new services, they're not able to monetize because they're not able to value, because they're not able to measure, in many cases, this impact. And, well, we're talking about churn, but there are other things. At Spotify, probably, because of the app, you know whether the user is on an iPhone or Android. Right. You know whether he's on Wi-Fi or cellular. What you probably don't know is whether, if the connection is not very good, is because the user is, far from the antenna, or there are many users in that cells that are using a lot of data, or maybe the operator is actually throttling the traffic because the user is reaching its cap, right? So all those contextual information that are not private, really, because they're abstracted. I can't imagine that they could not be valuable to that relationship to make that user experience better, right? Why is it not happening?
Yeah, and I think that is where you're getting that partnership element coming in, rather than just saying, an over-the-top provider that does not want to work with the telco. Suddenly you could see your telco traffic spiking just because they launch in your region. And suddenly you're getting massive amounts of traffic from metropolitan areas where it was flat before. I hate to use the utility word, but it is like my water company. My water company knows exactly how much water I use, but they have no idea whether I'm watering in the garden with that, making ice cubes, putting it in my whiskey. That's the level of detail. But they would also like to know if there was some new amazing usage for water that's going to increase demand, particularly in certain areas. So that there is that give and take of we're going to switch on a service in this region. We're going to enable more of the Shazam type links to advertising through mobile devices. We've got a second screen application going live. Cooperating with the telco around that has benefits to everybody.
But I think the limit to the comparison to the analogy to the water company,
even I went out with that one
is
before
that
the end.
Unlike in water company, you don't have somebody that's going to all of a sudden decide to open 20 Olympic pools in its backyard and needs to siphon up the whole capacity of the network for the next 10 hours without knowing. I'll throw an example here. Earlier this summer, I'm in Canada. We've seen, with the launch of videos on Instagram, we've seen like the number of video connections in wireless networks grow by 40% overnight, just because a new service was introduced, you know. And well, I can't help but thinking that if I were a network operator and saw just my traffic spike overnight without any warning bells, I would be concerned. I would be concerned because, well, I'm responsible for the quality of delivery, and because how do you manage that quality of experience for the user if you have spikes that are completely unpredictable? So I can't help but thinking that more collaboration between OTTs, between internet services and network operators is necessary. Well, Gunnar, so is that it for network operators? Are they going to just throw the towel and just be good at managing services, which is managing networks, which is not a small thing by itself, but are there not services that network operators can organically operate in a profitable and in a successful manner?
Oh, there is. We're not going to throw in the towel. I don't think any operators is going in that direction. At least Telenor is not, and we had Mozilla here on the stage, and Deutsche T-Mobile and Telefonica, for instance, working them. I know they are not. So I'm not sure if it's ever been invested that much in service on the service layer as it has been now from the operator side. We do know a little bit more than the water company. We do, fortunately. I see your analogy, but I don't quite agree with it. There is also one thing else to remember, that we are under regulations, which Spotify are not to the same extent at least. So it's not all information we can share. And the problem is also that those regulations vary a lot from country to country. Mm-hmm. It's completely different regulation in Pakistan than it is in Sweden. So I'm not going into those, but there are issues there. But on the service side, now we are doing, I would say, more and more. What we have learned, at least, is that, in my view, operators should focus on developing internet service which is based on where you can succeed on the assets the operator already have. Trying to build a position within, for instance, for an operator to build a position within a music service, it's not something. You don't have a competitive advantage for any reason, actually. So in my view, at least, I think operators would have to, or will, try to develop more and more services, but based on what they actually know. And it's one service that is core for most operators, at least telco operators, which is communication services. And to make good communication services that are integrated with the network and with the CS voice and SMS, that's something that operators actually are the only one who can do and should do. Like Telefonica has done with the 2Go solution, for instance. Not necessarily join, but at least services that connect to the network.
Yes. My opinion, again, is that for voice services and messaging services, and to a certain extent, services around streaming for music, you can actually quantify the load on your network and the impact on your network, and therefore the costs. And therefore, you can probably derive a business model that makes sense based on, number of users and location, and see, well, it's going to cost me that much to serve that, and then maybe create a price that makes sense for the customers and for the internet services. Now, when it comes to video, it's another variable, and it's a much larger variable, right? Because you could have somebody watching a video, two people watching the same video, and one is consuming a very small amount of the network capacity, and the other one a very large amount, because different devices, different network technology, different encoding rate. How does that factor in? I don't think you can, as a network operator, continue to do the best effort thing when it comes to video, because it consumes so much more capacity of your network, and we've seen that networks even over LTE are already seeing congestion signs. Is that, do you see that for OTT video there are specific paradigm that needs to be built, specific relationships that need to be built?
Yeah, you're into a very difficult spot actually, because as you see, compared with music services, I guess most mobile users of Spotify or the music services, they use offline modes.
Yes.
Because you listen to the same music several times. You make your playlist and you listen to it. But actually it doesn't take that much data traffic, and it's more stable. The problem is, of course, movies, but also sports events, of course, which are streamed direct, and that takes a huge amount of capacity. And I can't sit here, I don't sit here with an answer how to handle that, because that is increasing tremendously.
It is.
It is definitely, and it's an issue, but I can't say exactly what we do. The only thing we say that we see that we have to be better to, we have to build, just increase capacity, of course, and we also have to get good pricing models, of course, to support that capacity increase. Because, and that's an important thing for services, OTT services, and building capacity is not free either.
Yes.
Yeah.
So. Well, that's a topic that we'll see in the streams later on this afternoon. Well, actually at noon, so in a few minutes in the video and broadband management streams up the stairs. Before we part, maybe a final comment from each of you on the possibilities and challenge of partnership between OTTs and telcos, starting with you, Melker.
Well, I think I talked quite a bit about the opportunities in the keynote, but I think the challenge is still, the economics on these deals are very difficult because, I mean, the margins, and I'm speaking for music, the margins on digital music are small to begin with. Then obviously if you add a third party into that, they shrink even more. So I mean, that continues to be, I think that we've been able to get through a lot of that, a lot of those challenges, but it's still very, very tough, and especially in markets where I mentioned before, where there are prepaid, where prepaid is predominant, and it's sort of not possible to even bundle music for an extended period of time, then the economics become very challenging because there's no commitment possible. So,
of course. Thanks, Michael. Gunnar?
Maybe I should leave the word to Michael in the last 50 seconds. I think I took my time.
Yes, sir.
I would agree with both Gunnar and Michael that the cooperation is always going to be the best route. It is about telcos and operators doing what they're good at. So when that comes to video, that means building smarter technologies into the networks. It means improving encoding technologies, because video is, yes, if we think music and audio is a challenge today, video is just around the corner. You're already seeing this on fixed networks. That more realistic telco attitude to doing what's right is what's allowing services like Spotify to get onto bundled tariffs and reach huge amounts of consumers. And we'll see more applications doing that over the coming years. And that's got to be good for consumers. It's making them use their device, appreciate it more. It's making them connect in all sorts of new ways. So an unexpected point of optimism from me.
Thank you.
I think we have to do both from operator side. We will focus on developing services itself, but we will partner a lot more also. And our goal, at least, is to be, we have to adapt to what the users want to have. So in some areas, we can probably do things on our own. But actually, the most important thing is that the users get the best service. That's the most important thing, and that's our focus, at least.